We read today from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 13, verses 24 through 30, and then 36 through 43. Jesus put before the crowd another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, "Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from?" He answered, "An enemy has done this." The slaves said to him, "Then do you want us to go and gather them?" But he replied, "No, for in gathering the weeds you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers, collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn." Later, Jesus left the crowds and went into the house. And his disciples approached him, saying, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field." He answered, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen." The Botanical Garden of Padua, Italy, is believed to be the world's oldest continuously cultivated garden. Situated on property owned by Benedictine monks, it was created in 1545, so that university students could learn to properly identify medicinal plants, which up until then had been a pretty dicey and free-spirited proposition. When plants are all the medicine you have, you must be able to identify which ones are helpful or harmful in various situations. Over the last 475 years, this garden in Padua has come to include plants from all over the world and played a key role in understanding many exotic species. I imagine this garden is very beautiful, probably well ordered, with even rows of plants and careful landscaping. I imagine that devoted gardeners walking through the Botanical Garden of Padua might exclaim, "This must be what heaven is like." We do that, of course. We imagine heaven as a place, and we compare it to the most beautiful places we can think of. But when Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven, which in Matthew he does quite a lot, he doesn't say it's like a place at all. He says things like, the kingdom of heaven is like yeast, or a mustard seed, or a treasure, or often a person and that person's particular experience. For example, today, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field, and to everything that follows that. There is a garden in this story, but the kingdom of heaven is not so much like the garden itself as it is like the person who grows it and all that happens in the experience of growing it. The kingdom of heaven is like that whole story in which the master sowed good seed in his field, while everyone was sleeping, an enemy came and sowed the field full of weeds. When the weeds sprouted along with the wheat, the servants, who perhaps have never worked in agriculture before, are surprised. "Master, you sowed good seed. Where did these weeds come from?" "An enemy," says the master, Shall the servants then defeat the evil designs of the enemy by immediately tearing out the weeds? No, says the master. For in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Evidently, the wheat and the weeds grow so closely together that their roots entwine. So let them grow together, says the master, and at harvest time, we'll sort it out. Now later, the disciples come to Jesus and ask him to explain this story. Although the disciples call it a parable, Matthew's Jesus treats it more like an allegory, less mysterious and open-ended, more cut and dried, with everything in the story standing for something else. The sower of good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil, and the harvest is the end of the age. Now, the reason that I went to the internet with the search term oldest continuously cultivated garden, you did not think that I already knew about the Botanical Garden of Padua, did you? The reason I went on that search is that if this harvest in this story is the end of the age, then this field that is the world has been growing for many, many generations. The weeds and wheat were not sorted out when the first generation of Christ followers died, or when the monks who planted the Garden of Padua died, or when the members of the ancient Moravian unity died. The weeds and wheat were still growing together when the first Moravians of Salem were gone, and they were still growing after your great-grandparents were gone, and they are still growing together now. Assuming the end of the age is the end of all time, well, the harvest has not come. So thinking of the long wait for harvest, I went to the internet hoping to find an image of a garden that has been growing for generations and even centuries. Isn't it funny that the oldest garden turned out to be a place where different kinds of plants have grown together over centuries just so that people could learn to tell them apart? That seems like an important mission. If the different plants must grow together till an end-of-age harvest, could we not spend the time learning to discern which ones it is safe to chew on while we wait? Understanding the different kinds of plants might at least help us to identify invasive species before we invite them to invade. Kudzu is all over the American South because planting it here seemed like a good idea in 1876, when people in the United States got excited about using this Japanese plant as an ornamental. But the planters didn't ask how the non-native species might take to the American environment, which, as it turns out, was like gangbusters. If the weeds in your wheat field are kudzu plants, the weeds are going to win. Or consider poison ivy. The first written account of this plant, and I have had a great time on the internet this week, as you can tell. The first written account of poison ivy was from explorer John Smith himself in 1624. He spoke of how the plant causeth redness, itching, and lastly, blisters. He must not have had a bad case of lastly blisters himself, because he complained that poison ivy hath got itself an ill name, although questionless of no ill nature. By 1640, poison ivy berries had been collected and sent to England to be cultivated. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I have heard it said that this story of weeds and wheat is a warning against being judgmental. I have heard it that if the wheat and the weeds in the field of the world are the children of the kingdom and the children of the evil one, then the wheat and the weeds must be people, all the people alive on this earth right now, and it is not for us to judge them. It will all be sorted out at the end of the age. And by the way, those of us who think ourselves wheat might turn out to be weeds. Fair enough. But while the master tells the servants not to uproot the plants, I don't actually see anywhere in the story that he tells them not to notice the differences between the plants. The servants have already noticed that some of the plants are weeds. The master just tells them not to pull the weeds up because in doing so they will pull up the wheat as well. And another thing, since the harvest is not till the end of the age, perhaps whatever is growing in the field of the world is something that lives longer than a generation of people, longer even than many generations. Maybe this story is not only about how we live with the individuals around us. Maybe what's growing in the field of the world is something much bigger and older than individual human beings. Maybe the story has something to tell us about whole human societies, hundreds and even thousands of years old. Maybe it also has something to say about the ideas that shape those societies and sometimes even outlive them. Which idea is the wheat and which is the weed? What mistakes have we made failing to discern over centuries between benefit and pestilence? How do we deal with the consequences of embracing what seemed like a good idea at the time? The field is the world. And could the children of God's kingdom be all God's good ideas for human life, seed from the fertile soil of God's imagination? If we think of the parable this way, then it urges us to continual discernment, an effort to recognize God's good plants so that we can try to cultivate them. But they do compete for space in a soil that has always been full of other seeds as well. You know this. The weeds have been there all along because the mortal world has always been seeded with both life and death and blessings and curses. How among these do we recognize the good ideas of God? By their fruits shall we know them. Fruits like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. If the good ideas and the bad ideas must grow together, we do well to learn to tell them apart. Otherwise, after embracing an idea as beneficial, a society may realize too late that the idea has grown into monstrous vines, choking out the life-giving plants, dropping poisonous seeds that live in the soil for generations. And then a reckoning will be demanded. The defeat of the Third Reich was such a reckoning for Germany. The downfall of communism was such a reckoning for Eastern Europe. Compensating victims of forced sterilization was such a reckoning for the state of North Carolina. We have more reckonings to come. And here is one more possibility to consider. Maybe the end of the age doesn't have to be the end of time. In the parlance of historians, many ages of human society have already come and gone, and the end of each age has involved some sort of reckoning. I was reading an article this week about how the Black Plague of the 14th century spurred social change that in turn brought an end to what we call the Middle Ages. Does the present pandemic mark the ending of another age, a time of sorting to come? Author Lawrence Wright says, like wars and depressions, a pandemic offers an X-ray of society, allowing us to see all the broken places. When people confront their failures, says Lawrence Wright, they have an opportunity to mend them. Maybe harvest follows harvest, age after age, and the weeds and the wheat can be sorted out again and again. It is a great mystery how weeds and wheat grow so closely together that to uproot the evil may somehow be to damage the good. It suggests a complexity to human society, indeed to the human heart, that only heavenly reapers can ultimately disentangle. But just because we let the weeds grow with the wheat doesn't mean we have to swallow everything they produce. It also does not mean we have no defenses against the weeds. Can't we always sow more wheat? Sow and sow and sow the good seed until the bad seed no longer stands a chance. And perhaps, instead of sending poison ivy berries off to others for cultivation, we could work to stop the spread of the seed. Surely there are ways of keeping back the weeds until at last all the causes of sin are collected and burned up with fire. Maybe that is an idea whose time will come again and again. The Botanical Garden of Padua is beautiful, but it is not what heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is not like any place. The kingdom of heaven is like the master who sows a field with love and hope, and the enemy bent on destruction, the servants who try to make the right choices, the wheat and the weeds allowed to grow together. The kingdom of heaven is complex, full of challenge and mystery and surprise, all leading to harvest and the shining triumph of God's best ideas. The kingdom of heaven is like the whole story. Let anyone with ears listen. Amen.